Well, meanwhile, here in Britain on Saturday, the Trade Union Congress held a national demonstration in central London. Tens of thousands came from across the country to protest against low pay and austerity cuts. Mariana Pope-Wiedemann joined the march and brings us this report.
Average wages in Britain have been declining for the past 7 years. That's the most sustained decline since the 1870s. Trapped between rising cost of living and falling wages, today up to 150,000 people have joined a national demonstration called by the TUC. They've marched through central London and assembled here in Hyde Park to tell the government that Britain needs a pay rise.
I woke up this morning and there was definitely forecasts of showers. I thought it would be a lot quieter than it is, but people have really turned out and everyone seems to be in a really positive mood that there's potential for change.
People across the country have been trapped since 2010 between soaring living costs and falling wages.
We've been campaigning for a London living wage since April. A lot of people who marched today showed solidarity to us and we wanted to repay that.
Pay inequality in Britain is as bad now as it was before the First World War, with directors earning 175 times the income of the average worker, which explains why, despite talk of economic recovery from the government, less than 1 in 5 Britons feel their situation is improving.
The working people that we serve, that we're meant to be out there protecting and paying because their services is being diminished. We're facing the worst cuts the fire service has seen for years. We're losing firefighters hand over fist every single month due to this ideologically driven austerity. There is a better way. They have to fund the fire service. Ultimately we're out there helping people and we need proper funding behind us to do that.
The government states that pay restraint has protected jobs. But with tens of thousands now dependent on food banks and 1 in 6 British children living in poverty, public opposition has been building throughout the summer. Up to 1 million workers have taken strike action over low pay and privatisation in key sectors like education, welfare and the NHS.
Free education!
Many called for progressive taxation and a crackdown on military spending as a means to secure funding for classrooms and hospitals.
So much of privatisation is just transferring public funds to private companies to make a profit out of running these services. It's criminal what's going on, and there clearly is an alternative, but it's an alternative people are going to have to fight for and march for and protest for and strike for.
The most fantastic show of solidarity between working people, and we've adopted that slogan because nothing explains it better really than that is what we're here to do. We rescue people, not banks. They need to stop cutting vital services like the fire service to fund bankers and their bonuses.
These demonstrations are massive and they're happening across the country and they happen frequently, and there seems to be a complete kind of just disregard that they happen from government and from the media as well. Don't think they're given as much weight as they clearly have.
With a pro-cuts consensus amongst the 3 major parties, it remains to be seen how those opposing the cuts and poverty pay will vote come the 2015 election. But today the message has been clear. Until represented in Parliament, they will be out here making their voices heard on the streets. Mariana Pope-Wiedemann reporting for Islam Channel.
Well, with me to discuss this on the line is economist Michael Burke and Riccardo la Torre, chair of Essex Fire Brigades Union. In the studio, Ben Southwood, head of policy at the Adam Smith Institute. Welcome to you all. Ben, the deficit isn't really being cured by this government, so austerity isn't working. I mean, it's higher now than it was under Labour.
That's true.
So why are we suffering if it ain't working?
So the main determinant of wages is productivity. If you look at what's happened over the past 7 years, is we've gone through a very tough recession. We've become much less productive on average. Wages have gone down in real terms because we've become much less productive. You can't pay someone more than what they produce. Now, it's a bit difficult to line that up for the public sector because productivity is much harder to measure. Usually we just measure productivity in the public sector by how much we pay them, not by any output measure. But it seems to me that we should expect public sector wages to do about the same thing as private sector wages. Most people are in the private sector and it'd be unfair to have one split more than the other. But the basic point is productivity has gone down. We can't expect wages to go up. What we need to do is solve the economy overall. If we want to get more people back in work, people are competing, we get more capital invested, we'll get higher wages.
So, Michael, let me bring you in on this. I mean, Ben sounds as if he doesn't really think that all this has got very much to do with austerity. It sounds like it's got a lot more to do with productivity, and we know that there is more than one way of boosting that.
Well, there is, of course, more than one way of boosting productivity. You can either make people work harder or longer, and so you get more productivity per worker, which is what's happening. But that just means people are working longer hours for, in many cases, less pay. Or you can boost productivity by investment, i.e. what they're working with, the types of capital goods or computer equipment or whatever that they work with day to day. And that's not what's happening. There's been no investment. And the whole of the austerity policy, it's quite interesting actually in terms of this discussion, because I think it's focused on the right thing. But it's got, what's happening is that wages are lower, even though we're told we have a boom. And that's got nothing to do then with the government deficit. It's got everything to do with lowering wages and lowering living standards. That's what the austerity policy is about. And as a result, it's not leading to an increase in investment. In fact, investment is stagnant, just like it is for most of the living standards in this country.
Riccardo, let me bring you in here because, you know, Ben was saying here that it's difficult to deal with productivity issues in the public sector, but the government seems to have decided that in the case of firefighters, one of the things that it can do is lift your retirement age so that there's older people running up ladders to save people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the unworkable pension proposals that they're forcing onto us just, add to our woes at the moment as we're fighting against the massive attack on our living standards and our pay, as is the majority of workers across the UK at the moment. But it's an interesting point Ben makes on productivity. How you measure that productivity in life-saving services is very difficult. And if we want to speak productivity, there's an argument to say we're more productive than we've ever been, because ourselves, and I know nurses, public sector workers across the service are the same. We're doing more than we've ever done, and with less. We've lost 5,000 firefighters. We're doing streams of work that we're not even funded for. When we brought the country off its knees during the floodings earlier on in the year, we're not even funded for that type of work. So if we want to argue this a case of productivity, then we're doing more work than we've ever done, and with less of us.
I mean, Ben, this is the crux of the matter, really, isn't it, in the public services? Because, in London, we all know there's been a whole number of fire stations closed. I mean, don't want to worry you or anything, but the one nearest to here is closed. It's not a good place to be when you're doing that for a government, is it?
No, it's generally hard. We're dealing with much lower tax revenues than we expected. It might be that the government has done too much austerity, although they've done less than they expected to. But the problem seems to more generally be just being in a terrible economic situation, albeit one that is beginning to end. I just wanted to pick up on one thing one of them said, is that it's true that wages haven't been going up since we've entered a recovery, but the total wage bill has. It's because we've just had employment growth the fastest ever on a record per year. So there's an interesting question there. Would we rather have fewer jobs with higher wages or more jobs with slightly lower wages? And I think you make good arguments for both sides, but I personally come down on the side of we want less unemployment overall. So I think that helps the marginal people are the ones who wouldn't have a job at all. And I think that's the people we need most important to help, even at the cost of slightly falling wages for a period.
Michael, there's talk now of the European economies moving back into recession. So, I mean, a lot of people in this country don't feel they've got out of the last one. Are we going to be back in another before we've realised we're out of the last one?
Well, there's a distinct possibility that this recovery, very much in inverted commas, is as good as it gets for most people. There's a distinct possibility that we're going to have a period of very prolonged sluggish growth in which, for the majority of people, living standards continue to fall, followed by another recession. That's absolutely a clear possibility. I want to pick up on one thing that Ben said, if you don't mind, is that this is the typical Hobson's choice we're presented with. Do we want, more people out of work, or do we want more people in work but on extremely low wages? The reality is we don't have to have either of these if we have investment. What the problem is that the whole of economic policy is designed to boost the profits of the private sector. That's what austerity is about. And the argument was that if you did this, they would then invest. And that's clearly not happening. So something else needs to happen, and that means state or government intervention to correct the real deficit in the economy, which is one of investment.
Riccardo, what do you think should happen in terms of the trade union movement now after the demonstration? What should it be doing to try and get some of those priorities that people were talked about bounced into the political agenda, because they aren't there now?
Well, for starters, coordination. I think events like Saturday are an eye-opener for all workers. So we're all now really feeling the reality and the bite of the effects of this cost of living crisis. And when we hear like-minded people, we hear workers from other unions and speaking and on the stage, etc. on Saturday, that really G's up work. And I think the answer is definitely in a movement together. We have to work alongside each other. And in regards to getting the parties to listen, coming up to the next general election, there's arguably a golden opportunity here for a party such as Labour, to win back the hearts and minds of workers in this country, and put things into their manifesto that are really going to be in the national, really in the interest of workers across the United Kingdom, such as reversing anti-trade union laws, making promises on getting rid of the public sector pay freeze.
OK, Riccardo, I'm going to have to stop you there because that's all we've got time for. But we will be looking at the economic condition of the nation in more depth in our forthcoming documentary, The Age of Austerity. Here's a brief preview.
In 2007, the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression exploded from the heart of Wall Street and contaminated the entire global economy. The banks were bailed out and politicians declared an age of austerity.
It's an emergency, it's a crisis, we're going to end up like Greece, we have to cut spending right now. Complete lies.
They say we're all in it together, but inequality has never been greater.
If there's no food, there's no money, there's nothing.
People having to essentially beg for their human rights.
This series follows the aftershocks of the Great Recession. From the impact of the cuts,
it's a sort of slow burn social disaster,
to the rise of the far right. And we tell the story of those fighting for a different future. Age of Austerity, only on Isam Channel.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this episode of The Report. I want to thank all of my guests and, of course, you at home for watching. Do remember that you can keep up with us on Twitter by following @Islam Channel and by using the hashtag The Report. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time, but for now, we'll leave you with cooking.